tonight we are talking about babies and infants particularly. We apparently in all our webinars have never focused on babies and infants. And I think obviously it's only a small group of the whole, but it's one particular area that inspires a total lack of confidence, and particularly in physiotherapists. I think we won't just talk about type 1, although that's our most difficult group to treat if you've never treated SMA before, but even spotting type 2, managing type 2, and even some of the little type 3s if they present relatively early. So what we're going to start with is sort of an age thing and go from babies, and obviously the tiniest babies are not going to have type 2 and type 3, they're going to have type 1. And once they are diagnosed, they're all going on to new treatments, or certainly are going on fairly rapidly. But the treatments, as we know, are not cures, and we cannot predict necessarily from copy numbers or how the babies present as to how they will end up. Now, we do know that the stronger type 1s will gain more than the weaker type 1s, and the very weakest type 1s are really not going to gain an awful lot. But that does not mean we don't need physiotherapy. These children are still surviving much longer, and individually each one still needs to be seen as an individual, on treatment, not on treatment, on BiPAP, not on BiPAP, and still needs physio for function, for comfort, for posture, and to maintain as good a body as possible for whatever's they're going to face, and whatever the family's going to face. Scoliosis is a big problem. Neck issues, which is called torticollis, is a big problem. And obviously contractures and weakness all get in the way of a baby functioning as a baby should. They're still babies, but they're not doing what babies could be doing. So I have a new baby. It's not quite as big a baby, so it makes it a bit easier to show you what's going on with this baby. And when it comes to questions, if there's anything I need to write down, I've got my little pen and paper, but we've got all sorts of bits and pieces here tonight. Apparently this baby's called Sammy. I only know that because it's written on its back. Whether it's a girl Sammy or a boy Sammy, I haven't quite worked that one out. However, this is Sammy, but Sammy's actually got quite good head control, so it doesn't really work as your typical SMA 1. But let's assume I am holding Sammy's head because Sammy doesn't have very good head control, and this is where we need to start. This is not about respiratory physiotherapy. This is not about feeding. This is not about overall management. This is purely about the functional physiotherapy that we would be doing for these children. Now, we are hoping, because it's so important, that all these children will develop head control. Because without head control, it does mean that your world becomes much more restricted. You find it hard to sit because you can't control your head when you're in an upright position. You'll find it harder to travel. You're always having this sort of long-term view of the ceiling, and it's generally much harder to function, and you end up doing a lot inside lying or lying. And the world is not really built for children who are lying down. They're built for sitting and for standing. We're built to look at the world there, not there. And so what we're looking for is head control. And the weakness of our neck muscles is mostly the front muscles more than the back muscles. But a head is a very, very heavy piece of equipment, very heavy. And when you have muscle weakness, it is really, really difficult to control. So the first thing that we're doing with necks when we're little, when we're lying down, is encouraging side to side, turning one way and the other. Some of the babies that we have seen, and we've got well over 40 infants and babies with type 1 now, so young children, get tightness in their neck muscles. This one that sticks out here, the one that sticks out at the front, all get tight. And it is so important as soon as you have a diagnosis, or even before when you suspect a problem, that we start with making sure that neck turns every way it should. Now there's 6 main movements. There's turning side to side, and that often is one of the most difficult movements. Equal amounts, chin to shoulder in both directions. And if they can't do it, you need to do it for them. And it's no good just rolling their shoulders. You've got to take the head and turn it. And while it might not be a very popular thing to do, if we get stuck to one side, we end up losing our head. It can have an effect on the spine. It can have effect on our seating, and it affects our control generally. So the one that we tend to find the hardest for the children to do, or the one that they lose range, is this side to side, going this way, rotation of the head. Then we have what we call side flexion, which is ear to shoulder. And usually with side flexion, it's much easier to do it to one side than it is to do it the other side. And again, it is important that we teach the babies and work with the babies to go side to side. And you can do this through games. You can get them to look to one side. You can get them to look to the other side. If they always want to look one way and their cot is facing, they always look away, looking out into the room in the cot, then put their head at the other end and spend a little time with their head at the other end so they're turning that way. Now, I know feeding, most mums or even dads, if you're feeding, will feed the same way, assuming we're not totally gastrostomy or nasogastric tube fed. You tend to hold the bottle in the same hand each time. You don't tend to swap, but try swapping, try going the other way so that the child is turning their face to you the other way. Otherwise, again, we're back to the same thing, that they're always turning one way because you tend to hold them in one arm. If you're right-handed, you often hold them in the left, so you still have the right hand free. You need to actually develop the ability to work with your child going both ways. So that is really important. So we've got rotation, side flexion, and then the last 2 are flexion and extension. And they rarely get limited. They may be limited only by the fact that the other 2 movements are limited. But to go forwards and to go backwards is not limited, but the actual movement is extremely difficult. How do we develop head control? We can do lots of things. We can actually sit the baby. We've got our hand in a position that will catch the head, and we can stimulate them. We can hold their trunk quite still and try and get them to balance that head on the trunk. Now, it's important, what I said is to hold the trunk still. And the reason that's important is because their trunk is floppy too. And if you've got a floppy trunk and a floppy head, they can't control a floppy head on a floppy trunk. So you need to somehow support that trunk really well to encourage head stability. Even if they can't lift it backwards and forwards, we start with stabilizing and keeping it still. And I've got a hand at the front and a hand at the back, and I'm working in this sort of position where I'm with the baby. And having their bottom on something, sitting down, allows me to keep their pelvis stable, their trunk stable, and then work like that. You can't do that from lying down. It has to be from sitting up. Now, if the child has respiratory issues and find it difficult to sit up, it may well be that you can only do this with their BiPAP on. So you have to think about what position. You can do it in semi-recline, but it's much, much harder to start off in semi-recline because, of course, the head wants to fall backwards. So when we're trying to start with head control, we're trying to start in this upright position. And if we can't do it there, we have to think of other ways to do it. Against our shoulder, either backwards, often into a mirror or to another parent, over our shoulder this way, often on our knees. If we're sitting there with our knees up, we'll put the baby against our knees. So our knees are here and we've got the baby sitting down here against our knees and we can work there. And then the last place is on a therapy ball, and we really like a therapy ball for the smallest of babies. And I have to say it was hard work blowing the darn thing up today because my pump was too big. This is not a therapy ball. This is one of those blow-up footballs. You don't have to have a therapy ball. A blow-up football is great for the small children. And we start off, obviously, head to one side. You don't want them face down and squished. But we start off in a recline, prone, semi-prone, and even almost upright. And we really love the ball for this because you can encourage them to come down, go over, turn. It's quite a nice surface. It's soft. If they do manage to lift their head, they're only going to fall onto something fairly soft. They're not squashing their tummy as they would if they were completely flat on a bed, on the floor, on a mat. So we really love to start on a therapy ball. But as I say, it doesn't have to be one of the big gym balls, one of these blow-up footballs, and you can get those in any pound store. And we start here with trying to get head. Now, the children always get the ability to come up better than in this position on their back. That is one of the very hardest things for the children to do. Really, although we've got several type 2s doing this now who are on Spinraza, few on Risdiplam, that is a really difficult movement on your back to bring your head up. Type 3s often, most of the type 3s will do that. But it's much, much easier to come up from here and work on heads from there. And that is quite nice. And as you can see, even with this blow-up football, I can control it. I've got it controlled against a table, but you could be sitting on the floor controlling it against your knees. And that's quite a nice surface to play on. And the other nice thing about it is when you're holding, you can look at the baby face to face. On a big therapy ball, that's almost impossible because it's so hard to control. And in fact, if you're using a therapy ball, it needs to be supported against a wall, a piece of furniture. Or the other nice thing to do is find a wardrobe mirror, put it against the wardrobe mirror, and then you're behind the baby. And if they can lift their head or even turn their head and see themselves and you in the mirror. So very often when we're using one of the big gym balls, we'll do it against a mirror. But if we're using something smaller like these, then we can do it on our knee. Some of the bigger children, some of the more able children, we can use a roll. Now, some of you might know what these rolls are. You may have one. You may have been recommended one to roll your hamstrings or your calf muscles. And we can use these quite a lot for therapy as well, but the Pilates and yoga people among you will know what these rolls are. Some of them are quite unpleasant. They have quite deep contours for massage. But if you're going to get one for a child, you want a nice smooth one. And for the bigger children, they're absolutely lovely. I'm just going to put Sammy away and show you our friend here. For the bigger children, these therapy rolls are great for arm work, for upper trunk work, and for hips. Because if we're here, we can do a lot of work trying to get into kneeling, pushing our legs up, kicking up in the air, doing all sorts of nice things. So for the bigger children and the more able children, we may go to a roll. And then for the biggest of children, we would go to a peanut. You cannot, unless you've got to the age where you can sit on a therapy ball, really use one of the therapy or gym style balls for the bigger children. So we're tending these days very much to go for peanuts. Now, one of the problems that we have with heads is that if we are able to sit in a buggy or something, we tend to find that we're here. We're flopping to one side, and that doesn't help because it very often is always the same side that we flop to. And we may even sleep like this, but it's less likely. And if we're falling to one side in a car seat or in a buggy, there are plenty of nice little neck pillows that you can get, the car type pillows for babies to keep that head in the middle. So if we're really struggling not to use to gain head control, that's not going to teach them if you keep plonking that in. But if we're asleep in our buggy or falling asleep in our buggy or sitting in a chair where we're constantly to one side, these lovely little neck pillows, and they're quite small at the back. That's what's important with the baby ones. They're not thick at the back, they're thick at the sides, but they're quite skinny behind. You can't use an adult one, they're far too big. And as I say, they're a different shape because they are much skinnier at the back. Obviously, your usual Amazons. As it happened, this one's a bit ancient and came from Babies at Home, which I think is still available on the internet, even though all the Toys R Us have gone. This came from Babies R Us, and they have quite a nice selection. Now, the other thing that you can get if you find when they're lying down, they flop to one side, is one of these little pillows. Now, I know that in a normal baby, we never put their head on a pillow, but we're not talking normal babies, we're talking SMA babies. And this has a dip in the middle. And if you lie them in the dip, then it can stop their head falling side to side. And that's quite a nice way of getting them to sleep with their head in the middle, because these are not babies who are suddenly going to turn over and you're going to find them plonk face down. So you can use these nice little pillows when they're lying on their back to keep their head in the middle. And if you're well worried that they would fall asleep, well, just use it while they're lying there playing to stop them falling side to side. This is, you don't want to be playing and wide awake in one of these because it'll stop them moving their head around. This is very much for car seats and buggies. And that's quite important because that many times the kids come in like this because they're falling asleep in the buggy, fall asleep in the car seat, and that really is not a nice position. That's fine if you have a normal child who another time might fall the other way or may spend some time in the middle, but these children don't. And this is something we need to get away from, is these tight necks, because we do have some very tight necks and they're not a nice thing to have to stretch. They don't really like it. Okay, so if they don't get head control, they don't. But we at least want to try, because from head control, we get sitting. And when we're starting to get some sitting control, that's when we're looking at standing. Marnie, any questions there? Otherwise, I'm going to go on to contractures.
Yeah, we've got a few. So we've got one saying, as power chair supplier, especially now as we offer a really small seating system for younger customers, do you recommend a head or neck support for the youngest?
If they are tending to flop, yes. I mean, with all these things, what you want is something that's either easy to move, so it can be adjusted or taken away. You don't want somebody who's constantly using a neck support if they have a little bit of head control. You want them to be able to use the head control they've got for a certain amount of time. It's the old story that if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So we don't want somebody who's got head control if they don't need it all the time. So the most important thing is that the system will allow head control to be put in when they need it and maybe moved when they don't need it.
Okay, we've got how much tummy time should I encourage a day for a 2-year-old?
2-year-old type what? Because we don't encourage tummy time. Tummy time is, it's interesting. There is a wonderful physiotherapy leaflet about tummy time. And I was around when it was developed, and I screamed and shouted and screamed and shouted, because actually tummy time for type 1s is one of the most frustrating, unpleasant things that children ever have to do. And if you cannot turn your head, you can't lift your head, you can't support your weight on your hands, and just the epitome of a baby beached whale, it is not a useful or fun thing to do. And again, I know, if any of you know of Chiara Mastella, she does a lot of tummy time where she has the babies lying on very, very special bean pillows, which she makes herself. And if you are on these bean pillows, it's a posture support, and she lies the babies on there to sleep. This is not tummy time. Tummy time is the equivalent of a therapy session or play. And babies cannot have therapy or play in a position they can't move. So for a type 1, I don't do tummy time unless they are the best of the type 1s. And again, this is my tummy time on the ball. This is where we do tummy time. The other place we do tummy time is here, where you're lying back and you've got the baby there, and you can do tummy time there. You can encourage them to push on their hands, play with their hands, bring their hands in front of them, so you're supporting them there and bringing them forwards and backwards. You can play, and this is the tummy work we like. We do not like plonk flat on your tummy if you can do nothing while you're there. So we don't encourage tummy time as such. We know that people will say, oh, it stretches their hips, it's good for their back. I'm not convinced. I am seriously not convinced that tummy time works for a child who is too weak to do anything useful there. And these physios who come in and insist that all these babies go tummy time, put them over wedges. Where's it gone? I've got one here. This is my lovely Pilates block. I'm really kitted out tonight, folks. So they've got them over wedges where their head's down on the floor and their bodies are lifted up, and they still can't do anything, and they're screaming away because it's not comfortable or it's not functional. No, once they get stronger, we can think of tummy time if it's useful. Now, the most important thing about tummy time is a child who never goes on their tummy is not going to crawl. We have type 1s who really like being on their tummy, and that is absolutely fine. But if your child is unhappy on their tummy, there is no value in it. But if they are happy on the tummy, the beauty of tummy time is not even the head, because the head is hard work when you're completely flat. Even if you're suspended and your head's down there and you're hoping the head will at least get to midline from being hanging down. But the nice thing about tummy time, more than the head, is weight bearing through the arms. And that is the beauty of tummy time, because one of the things about learning to sit is the ability to save yourself if you fall. So if you're sitting down and you fall forwards, you will go smack on your nose if you can't catch yourself on your arms. And often development of sitting is one hand to prop. So you've either got one hand on your thigh or one hand on the floor and the other one's working. And that's how we develop normal sitting. We start with one hand supporting us and one hand working. Then we go to two hands up to sit. But we start with one hand down. And it's much, much harder to stabilize through these weak little shoulders if we've never done tummy time. Because what happens in tummy time is we learn first to rest on our forearms here. So we're resting on forearms, and then we start pushing up. And again, you can't push up if your head's hanging down. It's really hard. So it's really quite a combination of things. Tummy time has to be directed. It has to be not distressing, because if it's distressing for the baby or infant, it's distressing for the parent. We have to put it into a better way. There's got to be a better way of supporting weight through your arms, be it a big ball, you can get smaller balls, and you can be resting on a ball with your head on the ball, pushing back, pushing forwards, playing games where you're pushing with your arms to get that weight bearing through your arms. Pushing to one side, pushing to one side. This whole lying to sitting, if you've got an infant who can sit and you constantly bring them up to sitting, you never give them that opportunity to roll onto one side and push up, then again, they are losing opportunities, as we've very often said in the past, losing opportunities to exercise. If you do everything for them, you are taking away what could be an opportunity to learn to push up to sit. But tummy time is not my favorite. I do not believe in making these children very distressed if they don't like it. As I say, they like tummy time, and there are a few who do. We used to have one little boy who loved being on his tummy better than anywhere else. And he even used to like to sleep on his tummy, but it's not common. For some of the bigger type 2s, of course, we want to do tummy time because we want to roll, and that's fine. How long they do it? How long would you do anything? Until you get bored, or until you get angry, or until you basically roll back onto your back and suggest you've had enough. There is no set time for tummy time. It doesn't have to be half an hour. If you want to play roly-polies all the way across the floor, you will end up with a bit of tummy time. You really have to work it into fun and play. This is always our mantra at Great Ormond Street. Therapy is fun and play. At this age, certainly babies and infants, it's about fun and play with therapy built in. It's not about how long my child stays on their tummy. And it's certainly not about how long can my child scream while they're on their tummy, or shout, or cry, or just, for those who are too weak, have little tears dripping down their face, and that's always the hardest ones.
Okay. Another question is, my baby is 15 months old. He has head control but can't look to see up and down. His trunk muscles are very weak. Is there any specific exercises that would help with this?
Okay, now one of the things that I said was that by stabilizing your trunk, you can often get better head control. And very often what we do, it sounds as though that this young infant has stability problems around the trunk. We may even put a spinal jacket on. And we give spinal jackets not only for scoliosis, we give spinal jackets for stability. If it helps the child to learn to sit, if it improves their head control, if it gives them a more upright posture, it may be that a semi-rigid spinal jacket would be a useful thing to do for parts of the day, particularly when they're very floppy. We do lots of ball work for wobbly trunks and heads. We do lots of peanut work. We do lots of starting off here and trying to bring them up, stop them losing their head. Don't start working ahead from flat. Work ahead from recline and try and get them to come forward. So this whole idea of pull to sit, you know, when this test where they pull the baby to sit and the head gets stuck behind and then they start learning to come forwards. Don't do that from flat. If you want to teach the baby head control to come forward, either find a wedge or a way of reclining them, maybe in the car seat or in a buggy, and then pull them forward from recline. Because when you're working in that central bit of the range, they'll find it easier. And then once they've got that quite well, and you can come forwards a little bit and bring the head back, down and pushing it back, then you can go a little bit flatter and come up. We do a bit of resistance work with a 15-month-old. They're already old enough to push, to not let you push them, to say, don't let me push your head there, don't let me push it, don't let me push it, don't let me push it that way, don't let me push it, don't let me pull it back, don't. And you can do a little bit of what we call PNF built into play and exercises. These kids are bright enough. I've had very, very bright 14 and 15-month-olds, and normally we can play games where we are working on the head. Now, it may be unlikely as it is because they don't teach PNF in physio schools these days, but if you have a slightly older physio then they may know PNF and be able to do some of these PNF style exercises. So you've got the baby quite well supported. It may even be that your hand is behind the head and you're going, don't let me push your head, don't let me push. And what that will do is stimulate them to push back. Don't let me push it sideways, don't let me. And you can say, don't let me push it that way, don't let me. And you can make it into a game, and that's quite good fun. And even quite small children can do that sort of game.
Okay, we've got my partner thinks physio is a waste of time because my daughter has treatment. We argue about it constantly and I feel it's his way of getting out of it because he can't be bothered. How do I explain how important it is?
Firstly, we have to think about what he thinks is a waste of time. If we're talking about what do they want from physiotherapy? What do they understand from physiotherapy? A baby will develop normally without a physiotherapist. A normal baby does not need a physio. They need stimulation, they need a reason to move, they need encouragement, they need positive reinforcement. Even from tiny, we give them encouragement. We say, clever girl, well done, clever boy, keep going. And we give them all that they'll need. But they start rolling without us. Every mother knows who's had a child who's normal, you do not change a nappy on a nappy bench when they get to 4 months old and expect them to stay there while you go and wash your hands, because you'll find they've done a roly-poly and they're flat on the floor. And you always know when you have a mum who has a child with a problem, because they'll happily put the child down on the bed in the department and go off and do something. Now, most mothers won't do that because they'll say, can you just keep an eye on them? Or they'll leave them in the buggy until they're ready and say, whoops, don't want them to roll off the bed. A normal child will develop. They will develop head control. They will learn to sit. It might be slower. Some are faster. It may be an ethnic thing. We know that Afro-Caribbean babies are quicker, but why is physio a waste of time? What are they not convinced about? In SMA, as in so many other childhood conditions, the children cannot develop normally because, in this case of weakness, it's as simple as that. They cannot sustain their trunk. They cannot lift their arms above their head. They cannot necessarily roll over. They can't get themselves up to sitting. And if they can get themselves up to sitting, can they lie down without just going crash backwards? As it happens, we teach a lot of our children to lie down by coming forwards and rolling, and we have some little stars at that. And that makes life very easy if they can be playing and know that they can lie themselves down. But their legs aren't strong enough to stand. So what are we going to do? Leave them sitting down all the time? Do we want them to stand? Is this where we're going? Is it not where we're going? It's what do you want from your child? And the most important answer to that one is to fulfill their potential. If they have the ability to stand, are we going to leave them in sitting? If they have the ability to do some steps, are we going to leave them in a standing frame? So we need to think, what do we want this child to achieve? What do they have the ability to achieve? What is the treatment that they're on giving them that will allow them to achieve? We have just had a young lady for a week's intensive rehab. Now, at the beginning of the week, she wasn't taking any steps, SMA. At the end of the week, she was taking independent steps. She had worked incredibly hard. She was doing things she said she hadn't done for years, purely by working really hard, waking up all her muscles that hadn't been used for a long, long time, and getting some action. And yes, it was hard work. Yes, we needed to put a lot of effort in on both sides, but you would be surprised what you can do when you try. Word of caution, and this is so important in SMA, fatigue is a big issue. And that's one of these ideas of how long do I do tummy time? How long do I do physio? I can't tell you that because I don't know how quickly your child will fatigue. And this is so important. You cannot push through fatigue. If you make them tired, You will make them worse by trying to push through it. They have to rest. Their muscles need almost to power themselves up again. And there is one other thing you need to know about SMA babies. Really, really important. Not so much the better type 2s and certainly not the type 3s, but definitely the 1s and some of the weaker 2s. Move slowly. Don't rush movement. Give the child time to do it. Give the baby time to do it. If you want them to roll, don't expect them to go whoosh, over you go, whoosh, back, whoosh. They can take 3 or 4 minutes just to get over. And the tragic thing is people don't wait for them to do it. They'll see them really struggling to bring that arm across and they'll help. They won't do it again because they are so fatigued from that one effort. But give them time, give them a chance. Slowly, slowly, a lot of them can do it. And they're trying really hard. And you come along and say, oh, boom, can't wait. Poor thing. It's not going to happen. Give them time. Give them a chance. Slowly, slowly, because you'll only get it once and then they'll be too tired to do it again. You have to understand their fatigue. A lot of parents do, but don't actually think, oh yes, that's fatigue. You've got to accept 1 hour of physio is going to finish most children off. 2 half hours, 3 lots of 20 minutes, lots of play, lots of change, lots of different muscles coming in. Do a bit of arms, do a bit of legs, do a bit of head and trunk. Alternate and wait, wait, wait. 4-letter word, wait. Really important because everything is slow. Lots of 4-letter words. Slow, wait, give them a chance. Let them do it. You will be surprised what you see when you just wait. Sounds like a song title. Do a bit of legs.
Sorry, Marion, my laptop's going mental. Yeah.
That's all right.
Sorry, there we go. I'm hoping we're sorted now. It just suddenly all crashed on me. I'm really sorry.
Have we got any more questions?
Yes, we have. We've got quite a lot of questions. So
okay, that's fine. If we have to make this a two session one, it'll be a 2-session one.
Okay, we've got, could you please suggest some exercises for facial muscles?
No. And I'll tell you why I said that so quickly. Firstly, it's a speech therapy thing. And secondly, any speech therapist will tell you they don't work. I have seen, and I haven't got any with me because we aren't doing taping this week. I have seen faces taped from top to bottom. If you go to Poland, they have tape everywhere. They have tape on their top lip, tape on their bottom lip, tape over here, tape over there, tape over their head. I'm not convinced. A lot of people will say, oh, facial muscle exercises. Firstly, this is not a physiotherapy thing. This is a speech therapy thing. I think you need to speak to a speech therapist. Most will say they don't work, that they don't give facial muscle exercises. But one of the things that you can do, and I'll tell you that it works because I've just blown up that ball and it was hard work and my cheeks are absolutely aching. Singing, moving, sticking their tongue out, anything that will work their face. Smiling, you know what they say about how many muscles it takes to smile. So if you get that baby laughing and smiling, you're working facial muscles. Obviously, swallowing is a muscle, and that's another area that needs work. There is a taping that can be done underneath, under here. There is a swallowing tape that somebody I know who's a brilliant taper and in fact probably did more of the children's taping than anybody else has ever done. Esther Daru and Esther and some speech therapists have developed taping under here to help swallowing. Whether it will work in SMA, it has been shown to work in cerebral palsy for definite, because a lot of the kids with cerebral palsy are quite bad droolers. Very few of our kids drool. They don't manage their secretions. They pool in the back of their throat. They don't tend to drip them all over the place. But certainly facial muscle exercises have never been proven to work. But what you do need to do is make sure you work their jaw, because you can get, remember that's a joint to your jaw, and that can get contracted and you can have difficulties with opening it, which is not helpful for dentists and anaesthetists.
Will contractures still happen in children who started receiving treatment very young?
Worse for some of them. We have major problems with contractures. If we're talking, you know, one of the biggest problems we've got is that even the children who start quite young on nusinersen and Spinraz, Risdiplam, are still getting some contractures. We haven't got every type 1 sitting. We've got children who started at months old, weeks old, who still are not sitting yet or nearly sitting, but not everybody is sitting independently. We've got children who have got to sitting independently but aren't really standing independently. On the whole, it really depends, because one of the problems that we don't know is you will hear a lot about copy numbers, and the type 1s will have 2 or 3 copy numbers. The normal is 7. I've got 7, apparently. I might not, but that's what I'm told I've got. So type 1s can have 2 or 3, but having 3 is not a guarantee that you will be a good type 1. And it's very strange what you will see. So we can't predict right from the beginning. Now, people will say, oh, the earlier you present, the more severe you're going to be. But that doesn't work either. We've had children who've presented quite early who've done well, and some children who've presented early who haven't done that well. So unfortunately, we can't predict that just by starting Spinraza early or Risdiplam early, you will have less contractures. And in fact, what we have seen, and this is a big issue and one that needs major addressing, is the hip flexion contractures are worse with these drugs, not better. Now, what you must understand is that it was in the past very rare for type 1 babies to survive into adulthood. Not unheard of, but not common. We now have lots and lots of type 1 babies. They may not look like type 1 because they sit. We have some standards, and that's amazing. But ultimately, they started off or would have been type 1. And we've got, I mean, as I say, we've got well over 40 just at Great Ormond Street type 1, which is a crazy number. It's amazing. But we're seeing things we never saw before because those babies weren't around. We're seeing scoliosis, which in effect is a contracture. We're seeing hip tightness. This is the worst one, is hip tightness. We're seeing some knee tightness. And then we get all those wonderful physios stretching their hamstrings, this muscle at the back. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, and this is so important, is this horrible, what we call kyphotic spine. And that's when their spine rolls forward and you get this nasty hump at the back from sitting children on the floor. Simple as that. If you have a weak child who is spending a lot of time sitting on the floor, you get this awful humpy looking back. And there is a way of getting rid of that. You can correct it. Stop sitting on the floor. Now, this is all down to this muscle hamstring. And I have got a hamstring muscle attached to my baby because I want to show you what's happening. This is elastic. Your hamstring muscle in the first instance is a knee bender. It bends your knee up. If you're lying on your tummy and you kick your heel up towards your bottom, that's your hamstring. There's lots of other things your hamstring does, and all of those of you who get cramp in your hamstring will know there's lots of other things it does, because you get cramp in your hamstrings when you're doing all sorts of things in Pilates. Okay, so your hamstring is one of your strongest muscles in SMA. Now, what we have to understand is that muscles have a shortened position and a lengthened position. So if my biceps is here, then it's short. And if it's my biceps, which is this muscle that bends the elbow, if it's up here, it's in its short position. If it's there, it's in its long position. In its short position, it can't do anything. There's nowhere to go. So your muscles can't work in their shortest position. They work somewhere between the longest and the shortest, but they can't work in your shortest position. They can stop something moving. So if I need to hold something here at my face, then my biceps is working, and it's working very hard, but it can't get any shorter in the short position, is what I should say. Once it's in its shortest position, it can't get any shorter. So from there, it's active. There, it's static. I can be static somewhere else. But the hamstring is such an important muscle in SMA. And for all of those of you who are stretching your hamstring, stop right now. So if you're stretching your own hamstring, or you're having your hamstring stretched by a physio, or your physio's told you to stretch your hamstrings, forget it. Because it is the one muscle that'll keep you standing. And if you want a child to stand, they need short hamstrings, not long hamstrings. So stop stretching them. The other thing is, of course, that nobody knows what normal hamstrings is. So everybody just stretches them because they somehow think that you have to be able to stick your legs straight up in the air and that's normal. No, it is not. Your hamstring attaches to a bone in your bum. And if you don't know that you've got a bone in your bum, have a feel, because actually you are sitting on your pelvis and there's a bone right under your cheek here. That bone is where your hamstring attaches. It attaches to your pelvis and it comes down the back of your leg and splits in two. And you know where those tendons are, because if you do try and straighten your knee, you can feel them poking out behind your knee. Get your hand out of the way, Dolly. Okay, so you've got two bits of your hamstring. And as I say, if you straighten the knee out, you will feel those two could be like bowstrings if your hamstrings are tight. So it attaches behind your knee. It's what we call a two-joint muscle. It goes over your hip joint and over your knee joint. And one of the reasons that it is a cause of your kyphotic curved forward posture is that if you are sitting on the floor, you are stretching your hamstring and making it long. And in that position, it's going to pull your pelvis backwards. So what it does, it's attaching there and it's pulling your pelvis backwards. And to sit up, your body and your head are counterbalancing forwards. So if you are sitting on the floor and you have a weak trunk and your hamstrings are working really hard, they will pull your pelvis forwards and you have to roll your head forwards and your spine forwards to stop that happening. And the easiest thing to do is get off the floor. Take that stretch off the hamstring and you can sit up a lot straighter. So we either sit in a little seat, we sit on a wedge, and that will work that kyphosis. And it's so important. And parents ignore it. Fine, ignore it. But if you're going to sit on the floor in that horrible posture, it'll get fixed and there is nothing you can do. No jacket will hold it. The only thing that's going to straighten you up then is spinal surgery. So if we end up in this awful kyphotic posture with this big humpy spine at the top, and the only way we can look up is by leaning further forwards, we need to get that trunk upright. In the weaker children, the only way we can do it, as I say, is to take that stretch off hamstring, get them up off the floor. That's important. Okay, where were we up to, Marnie? Sorry, we've got lost.
Okay, we've still got
contractures. Oh yeah, the other contracture. Feet. Really important. A lot of feet. Now, I know a young lady, and Marnie knows her as well, who used to come to Jennifer Trust conference and she had feet that pointed down like little ballerina feet. So what did she do? She used to go to New Look and get the most amazing heels and look spectacular. And that's fine for girls who don't mind having tight ankles where their toes point downwards and sitting in the most incredible shoes that I would never have got away with because I can't walk in the darn things. And that is fine. Doesn't work for boys, and it doesn't work if your foot twists in like this or twists out like that. It only works when you point down in ballerina pose. But if you twist in or twist out, you're in big trouble. And twisting in and twisting out is not your ankle. It is your heel. Now this one's a bit small, so I may need to revert to my bigger dolly here. Okay, so this is your foot. Toes up and down, foot up and down, that is your ankle. But at the back of your foot, you've got your heel. And twisting in and out is a totally separate joint from your ankle joint. Your hind foot, your sub-talar joint, don't remember all these, is below your ankle. It's a totally separate joint. And it is that joint that twists or gets stuck to twist you in or twist you out. It's quite unusual in SMA. It's one of the few disorders where you actually end up with twisted out feet. But this is the problem. Your ankle merely moves in that one plane, up and down, and then your hind foot is what twists you out. Now, the reason we get twisted in feet is that when you are trying to pull your toes up towards your nose, there should be a muscle on the outside of your foot working by your little toes, and a muscle by your big toe should be working together to pull you up. But when most children will find that the muscle on the outside is much weaker than the muscle on the inside, and you have this big muscle, tibialis anterior, and you can find the tendon yourself because it really does stick out, your big toe tendon, not the one by your toe, but actually the one over your ankle. So if you pull your foot up, you can see that tendon sticking out here across the front of your ankle, and that pulls up really hard. And because it's on the inside, it pulls your foot inwards. And that is the problem. That's why we twist. Now, why do SMA feet twist outwards? We don't really know, because they still are not strong on that side. But it's very, very common for SMA feet to twist out. But not only that, we also know that it's quite common to have what we call knock knees, which is when your knees tend to be close and your feet, when your knees are together, your feet are apart. Yes, you can see there's taping on her foot. It's still there. And that's to hold that hind foot in a nice position. So we can tape them, but not forever. But a lot of SMA children have knock knees. And we've never really worked out why. It's probably because of the weakness around the hips, but it happens whether you stand or never stand. So that's a bit of a mystery in SMA. And we know that one of the things about these twisted in knees is it means that our CAFOs, and we do CAFO our children, and I know there's lots of physios out there that hate us at Great Ormond Street because they don't put their kids in CAFOs and they think we're awful and we think they're awful, but that's besides the point. The CAFOs in SMA particularly have a special knee that is more medial, comes to the middle to stop that knock knee. And yes, most of our children who do well in gaiters, but we all put our children in gaiters first to stand them up. Okay, so when do we stand the children? When they're ready. Who do we stand? Everybody who is ready. How do we know when they're ready? They've got to have head control. You can stand in a standing frame without head control, or you can stand particularly on a tilt table. And a tilt table is one of those beds that starts off there and comes up to stand. So if you don't have head control, you can certainly stand in that. Do we recommend it? Absolutely. It's weight bearing, it'll get you up. But a child who's got good head control even if they don't have good trunk control, we have them standing up somehow, some way, and we prefer them standing in gaiters to standing in standing frames, or do a combination of both. But a child with good head control should spend some time standing out of a standing frame. Yes, contractures. Going back to the question, of course, contractures are worse in some children than we have ever seen them.
Okay. I was just going to say, I don't know, you might say it's not, but when I've got one leg where the hamstring's a lot tighter than the other one, and that leg, my knee's in line, my ankle's in line, and my hip is in line. Whereas my leg, the hamstring's really loose, my ankle started twisting, my knee twisting, my hips back.
We actually like tight hamstrings. Hamstrings are such an important muscle in neuromuscular disease. Any physio who's stretching a hamstring in neuromuscular disease has one of two problems. Firstly, doesn't know what a tight hamstring is, or secondly, doesn't understand the mechanics. Now, we know that hamstrings can make your knees tight, but they're not going to make your knees tight on your own. If you're sitting all day, you're going to get tight knees. It's not just your hamstrings. You cannot stand without hamstrings. The other thing is, as I say, a normal adult, if there is such a thing as a normal adult, I have this favorite thing that I do where when I have an audience of parents and therapists, particularly, I make them stand up and touch their toes. And then I ask those who couldn't touch their toes to put their hands up, and they never want to do it. The ones who cannot touch the toes never want to admit to it because they think somehow there's something wrong with them. Actually, it's the wrong way around. The ones who can touch their toes are abnormal adults. Because once you get to adulthood, in theory, when you try and touch your toes, you should only be able to get to about mid-calf because your hamstrings naturally get tighter as you get older. So if you can touch your toes, you've got long hamstrings. And any physiotherapist who's actually understands anything about muscles, anything, and they all pretend they do, but they don't seem to, will know that short muscles are stronger muscles, long muscles are weaker muscles. And generally in the body, the stronger muscles, the power muscles, the ones that are often the weakest are shorter. They're often one joint muscles. There are two muscles in the calf. Gastrocnemius comes over the knee as a two joint muscle. It's a stamina muscle. Soleus is a shorter muscle, is the power muscle. Your hamstrings are two joint muscle. It's a stamina muscle. Your quadriceps are also, as it happens, two joint muscles, but are shorter. And they should be stronger, but they're not. And the very strongest muscle, which should be the strongest muscle in your body, which is why women, I've said this over and over again, why women have got big butts, is because your gluteus maximus, your bum muscle, is one of your strongest muscles. Why are women's bigger than men's? Because it's the muscle that makes you run upstairs, constantly running up and down after the bloomin' men folk and picking things up off the floor. That's what your bum muscles do, which is why women have big bums. So if you ever say that your missus got a big bottom, you'll know it's your fault. So there we are. That's something else we learned today. It should be your strongest muscle. In SMA, unfortunately, it is one of the weakest, along with your core muscles. But you have lots of core muscles, like you have lots of back and trunk muscles. You have lots and lots of core muscles. They're also weak, and they also need some work. But that's another story.
So we've got some more questions, which is it worth trying to encourage my type 1 to walk the started Spinraza at age 2, or am I concentrating on standing? If so, what can support? My physio will not give a walking frame, saying they're too young.
Who's not too young for a walking frame? That's not the issue. We have children standing in CAFOs at 18 months. If a normal child stands at between 9 and 15 months, in my opinion, every child should stand in some way between 9 and 15 months. This is not about making these children different. This is about using what they've got to make them the same. But I cannot tell you if your child should be walking if they are 2 and they're not doing it yet. We do not have, out of any of our 45 children on Spinraza or Risdiplam or even yet Avexis. I have to tell you, we do have some pre-symptomatic children. I won't even include them because they are a totally different ball game. But none of the children who started treatments after they were showing symptoms have yet started walking independently. We have some close to it, but not walking independently. Now, we are not expecting a lot of type 1s to walk independently. So it's very hard for me to say without seeing an awful lot more about your child. We have some very good type 1s, but none of them are really close to walking independently. And the other problem that we have that we don't know, even though the trials have been around for quite a long time, one of the biggest issues with SMA is that growth, height particularly, makes such a big difference. In the vast majority of type 3s who lose ambulation, the stronger type 3s who lose ambulation, I'm not talking about the children who only walk a few steps ever, the littlies who will do a little bit of cruising, may do a couple of minutes of walking, but never really walk functionally independently. The ones who walk functionally independently and then lose it are those who lose it around puberty, when their growth velocity, the speed at which they grow, totally overtakes their body. And that we have not yet seen with these drugs. They have not been around long enough for us to know whether a child who's been taking the drug from 5 or 6 years old, when they get to 9 or 10 and suddenly have an enormous growth spurt, will still benefit from these drugs. Now, we have a couple of boys on with type 3 on Spinraza, one of whom is doing very well and is managing to keep going through his growth, and another one who feels that even though he's on Spinraza and he's better than he would have been without it, that as he is growing taller, he is finding it harder and harder and not even sure if he can continue. Now, we know under NICE's current regulations, which are totally potty and up the spout and no rhyme or reason, that a type 3 who loses ambulation at this point in time, who has started Spinraza and then loses ambulation, will have it withdrawn after a year of having lost ambulation if we can't get them back on their feet. This may well change when the whole type 3 thing changes, we don't know. But at the moment, that is a concern for some of our children with type 3 who are finding walking much harder, that we may end up losing Spinraza. We don't know about Risdiplam because it hasn't been approved yet, but definitely it is height. In the 31 years I have been doing neuromuscular and the thousands of SMAs that I have seen, the height is the issue, not the weight. You can have a very chubby child who can still walk and a very long, skinny one who finds it incredibly difficult. So I can't tell you whether your child is going to walk without having seen them. I can get into 1,000,001 battles with physiotherapists, as I often do, about walking versus not walking, standing, CAFOs. Very few centres want to give out CAFOs routinely in SMA. We do. That's us. We believe in them. We think it makes a big, big difference to their contractures, to their spine, to their breathing, to everything is positive. Standing in CAFOs, we don't have lots of them walking, but it's not something we would ever consider stopping. But I cannot tell you what your child is or isn't going to do. At this, certainly not without meeting them.
Okay, got another question is, do you recommend manual wheelchairs from a young age for maintaining strength and using it as a workout?
Well, what we do recommend, and I think manual wheelchairs are slightly different, and I'll explain why. If you are going to stand in a standing frame, we recommend what we call dynamic standers, and that's the standing frames with the big wheels that you can push. And the reason we say that is if you're going to stand to exercise, you may as well exercise your arms as well. And it means you can move from room to room, you're not stuck in one place. And it gives you that opportunity to exercise. The difference with a manual wheelchair is, yes, you might want the child to push the wheelchair, but can they push over functional distances? It may be fine around the house. And once you're out of the house, can you really push up the hill out the street? Can you really get yourself up and down curbs, even when they've got those lumpy, bumpy things where they slope downwards? Can you push if it's windy? Do you really want to be pushing in the rain? I mean, can you push in the park? Can you keep up with your mates if you're pushing? Can you even keep up with your family? Unless you've got two huskies that you're going to tie to the wheelchair, are you actually going to get anywhere? So my honest feeling is it might be fine to do it around the house, but I think every child who is non-ambulant needs electrical mobility out of the house. Now, that's easier said than done on several levels. Firstly, you've got to get the darn thing in and out of the house. Secondly, you've got to find somebody to fund it. And again, wheelchair services are not our best friend. To get wheelchairs for some of the children is more than blood out of a stone. It's blood, guts, and liquid gold. Wheelchair services, probably, if I were to rank my unfavorite people in the whole world, somewhere along the line they'd be up there. Really, sometimes you do wonder. And one of the biggest problems I think we have with wheelchair services is in fact, I think in the whole of the wheelchair services in the UK, although they're headed by OTs, I don't think ever there is a pediatric OT among them who would head up the wheelchair services, so do not understand these pediatric conditions. They'll have seen a lot of cerebral palsy. Most of them will have never seen an SMA. But my honest feeling is twofold, that every child should have an electric wheelchair if they're non-ambulant at some point in time, and that all these electric wheelchairs should have a raising lowering seat, because if you've got arm weakness and you can't reach, then there's no point in being stuck somewhere near the floor when all your friends and all your shelves and the sink tops and the table and everything else are much higher up. So I think that it's essential. I don't care what wheelchair services say. Tell them that they're discriminating, tell them that they're not giving the child full access to their environment, but I do not believe in pushing a manual wheelchair on a child who can't push. The other thing is, let's get real. We have a lot of children come to clinic in manual wheelchairs, and they could push them themselves. But actually, if I say to them, why don't you push? Oh, mummy pushes me. So actually, the difference is, if you're going to get a manual wheelchair and ask them to do a bit of upper limb exercise, then actually let them push it and stop pushing them around in it. Because what we do find is the second the child's in it, the parent just pushes it, whether the child can push it or not. Again, think about this. Every time you do something for them they can do themselves, you are taking away an opportunity to exercise. If you want exercise to be part of daily life and they can push that wheelchair, stop doing it for them. Simple as that.
Okay. Are AFOs and spinal jackets still needed for those that have started treatment under 2?
Yes, it's back to the contractures. We have lots of children who started treatment under 2 that have got horrible spines, awful scoliosis, and have still got feet that point down. So yes, and I can't understand why people have got this hang up about starting under 2. By the time you're 2, you've probably got contractures anyway. Spinraza, risdiplam, Vexis, they're never ever going to cure a contracture. You let it happen, it will be there after you start treatment. These treatments will not cure contractures. They won't cure the disease. They're certainly not going to cure contractures. But contractures are getting worse, not better. And most of our children still need orthotics. I think out of our 40 odd children, there's hardly a child that doesn't have a spinal jacket. We do have a few with flexible joints who do not need AFOs, that's for definite. If they're very, very lax and their feet virtually come to their shins, or certainly come 20 degrees past upright, so your foot should come to 90 degrees at least. We're looking for 20 degrees. So this is pulling your toes up towards your nose. You get 20 degrees. Hang on, I've got one more dolly. Here we go. This one's Tiger, the other one's Ike, because this is where I got them from. Ike was from IKEA. Your foot should come to around 20 degrees up. It's not a case of getting to neutral. Neutral, you've already lost 15 to 20 degrees. You should come up by 20 degrees, toes towards your nose. Very, very few of the children get that. But if they do, if they're very lax, and some of them get them way up there, toes are virtually on their shins. The ones whose elbows go everywhere, you know what they're like. Fingers look as though they're actually hanging off at times. Their shoulders go everywhere, even their hips. They're the ones that, you know, hips, woo, go forever. Awful standers, great swimmers. The more lax you are, the better the swimmer you're going to be. So there's a positive. But yes, you still need splints if you're tight. Simple as that. And jackets. Yeah, most of our children are in jackets. And a lot of our children start at spin rasa under 2.
Okay. Now, I think this is an interesting question. I'll tell you why I once have asked it. But have you seen a decline of strength whilst on treatment, or a plateau with growth spurts? Now, I find this interesting because we always knew when I had a growth spurt, because I'd completely lose my head control. And I always had very good head control.
We know that certainly in the type 3s, when they go through a growth spurt, they used to fall more, and probably still do fall more, but are more stable on spin rasa, that's for definite. That's the ambulant 3s. And we only know about the ambulant 3s in this country because we only have ambulant 3s on it. In the 2s, we haven't had in this country enough 2s on it for long enough. The 1s, we don't see a deterioration so much as we see no change. I don't think we've got any children who've gone backwards. And I'm talking about GOS now, remember this is not the UK that I'm talking about the children that come to GOS. We have children who've made absolutely no progress on treatment. Let's get real. We have 2 children who are doing nothing on treatment. They're still on it because what they are doing is not deteriorating, because these children would not be with us now. So they are still with us, but they are not progressing. Now, if you are very, very contracted from a movement point of view, you've got nowhere to go. If your spine is got a horrible scoliosis, if you've got elbow contractures, if your hands are turned and you can't turn them upwards, if your hips and knees are tight, your feet are pointing down, you're not going to get much movement if your joints don't work. That doesn't mean to say these drugs aren't working. We've got children whose breathing's better, who shout more. We've got 2 children who can be heard much better than they do. There are other things. Their stamina is better. They can sit for longer. They can hold their head for longer. They can even do things like read and concentrate better at school because the fatigue is reduced. We've got kids who are less sweaty than they used to be. Now, I know that was never as much a problem with type 3, but certainly with type 2. And a lot of the little type 1s used to be the sweatiest bunnies on God's earth. And that seems to be a lot better. And there are other what we call autonomic signs that are better, but feeding and swallowing may still be a problem. We still get a lot of children with constipation. So there are still problems that just aren't disappearing. We haven't seen any real decline though, not yet.
Okay, sorry, I've lost my place.
We were talking about decline, a plateauing or decline.
Yeah, and I think the question was basically asking, could that be because of growth spurts? So like when
well, yeah, but we haven't I mean, our type 1s are growing and they're still improving or plateauing, but I haven't seen a deterioration yet. Our type 2s, we haven't had them on Spinraza for long enough. I think the majority of the 2s, we haven't had anybody who's passed their 7th injection yet. With the type 1s, we've got people onto 14, 15, 16 injections. And if they started them abroad, they've had even more. But they are still progressing. I mean, what's interesting is that the kids have been on it for 2 to 3 years now, and parents are still seeing progress.
Okay. Another question is, if you start losing range of movement in ankles in SMA type 1, despite using AFOs, is there a surgery that can help with this?
Well, we serially cast our children before we ever go to surgery, and we find serial casting very effective. I know that a lot of places don't do serial casting. We keep the children well away from orthopedic surgeons and plaster technicians because they do not understand SMA. We do 2 weeks of serial casting, and we can get very, very good results. And then the children can get back into AFOs. You can have surgery. We had a little boy who had surgery. He was a very, very weak type 2, almost, he's weaker than some of our good type 1s. But unfortunately, what happens is people think this is a cure, that surgery is suddenly going to make everything better. So they have their ankle surgery and they don't wear their splints because the surgeons don't think that they need them. You're not taking away the weakness. You're not taking away the muscle imbalance. All you're doing is you're lengthening a tight tendon, but it will get tighter again, and your foot will hang down, and you will get the covers at night in bed hanging them down if you don't wear nighttime AFOs. So guess what? His feet have got tight again. We had a young man many years ago who had surgery, who used to sit on the floor the whole time. And I've got some beautiful pictures of his feet. And he used to sit on the floor the whole time. That was all he did. And his feet turned in from sitting on the floor. So what would happen, he had his surgery, and after the surgery, he didn't wear any splints and still sat on the floor, and his feet went right back to where they were. So you can have surgery, but don't think it's a magic cure. You've still got to wear splints, otherwise your feet will be back to where they were at the most within a year, sometimes within 6 months.
Okay. Do all physios know how to help children once on treatment? As mine seems
absolutely
to get stronger.
No, I wish. This is my lifetime's work, and I'm not going to be around forever. I'm old. Look, they're still stretching hamstrings, and we've been saying for 20 odd years, stop stretching hamstrings. Do physios know? No, but we're trying very, very hard to teach them. The big problem we have is twofold. Firstly, a lot of physios do not have the time or the experience. If you have 1 or 2 SMAs on your books, you do not always make the effort to find out what to do with them. It's not common for physios to spend the time trying to work things out. The other problem that many community physios have is you will listen to me on a webinar which may say something completely different from the physio at your local neuromuscular service. Now remember, there's 18 or 19 neuromuscular centres around the UK. And this is not just England, this is the whole of the UK. And there are baby neuromuscular services who like to think they're neuromuscular services, but actually are very tiny and get very little experience. I won't name them, but I would like to, because I certainly wouldn't want my kids under some of them. However, there is still a lot of difference of opinion. As I say, there are certainly lots and lots of centres who will not use CAFOs. There are lots of centres who feel that wheelchairs are the only way to go. There are lots of centres who don't understand how not to stretch hamstrings, but to stretch hips. Will still turn children prone to stretch hips, don't even know how to measure them. And even the assessments that we're now supposed to be doing just talk about mild, moderate and severe. And all that relates to is whether they get in the way of function. So unfortunately, and I know this for a fact from other parents, At GOS, we measure top to bottom with a goniometer, one of those special measuring devices. And we have kids coming to us who are under other centres and say, "Ooh, never had that done before. Ooh, we've never seen one of those. Ooh, nobody measures that with us." We have the luxury of a 1.5 hour assessment minimum for our kids, and we do everything from top to bottom, spines, the works. Now, we have a separate respiratory physio, Lisa, and Steph and Helen help her. So we're getting bigger and bigger in the respiratory side. But we have the luxury of 1.5 hours because we fought for it over the years and said that's what's important. They tried to stop us about 5 or 6 years ago and said, no, your assessments are much longer than the rest of the country. Why? And that's because we do more and we look at more and we feel that it's exceptionally necessary. So we had a big fight, and we're very lucky that our prof does believe that physio is a major stay of neuromuscular and supports that. But I think it's very hard for parents when their local neuromuscular service doesn't necessarily agree and maybe doesn't have the experience, and then the community physios are not going to have it. We are, however, doing quite a lot of teaching online these days. I'm doing 2 SMA workshops in SMA 1 online in January, and I know that there will be other webinars in SMA from other physios around the country. But unfortunately, as I say, we're not always saying the same thing, and that's hard for parents. But you know, you speak from your own experience, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. Okay, we've got last question is, whenever I stretch my daughter's ankles, she cries and screams and doesn't want to do it.
Oh my goodness, because you're doing it wrong. Simple as that. We have said this over and over and over and over and over again. Please listen. You should not be stretching. She should be working. This is what we call active assisted. One of the reasons they scream is because they're fighting. The more they fight, the more it'll hurt. The more it hurts, the more they'll scream, the more they'll fight. Stretchers should never be passive. And this is another thing physios do not seem to be able to get through their heads. You have to have active assisted stretchers. The child has to be working for 3 very important reasons. Let's go back to this ankle. Firstly, we need to make sure that this ankle, this foot, is not twisted in and not twisted out when you're stretching it. It has to be in line. So if the heel is either inwards or outwards and you're stretching, you're not going to get a good stretch. You're going to get a quite painful stretch if you're not shown how to do it properly. So the first thing is you've got to try and bring the heel into the middle. Gently. Bring it as close to the middle as you can get it. That's important. You can't stretch a foot that's twisted in or twisted out because you are damaging the tendons on the inside or the outside without actually stretching the big fat tendon at the back that is tight. First thing. So you need the heel in the middle. From there, you should not be pushing hard. They should be pulling. Always, always, always. Active assisted. We try every joint. It's not easy, but we ask. They have to be part of the movement. Active assisted. The child needs to be pulling their foot up for 3 reasons. The brain is very clever, surprisingly enough. The way the brain works is the brain knows that if the child is pulling that foot up, this muscle that pulls down switches off. So when you are pulling your foot up, when you are actively pulling that foot up and the muscles at the front are working, the muscles at the back that you are trying to stretch switch off. And when they switch off and are relaxed, you will get a better stretch because they are not tight and pulling down. They are relaxed. So you're going to get a better stretch. That's the first thing. The second thing, if they are pulling up, they can't be pushing down. And if they're not pushing down, they can't be fighting with you. And then you don't get into these screaming, raging battles of pain. So they have to be doing the work, but they can do it best when you control the heel. So you have to learn to put your hand in the way that controls the heel and supports the foot, not pushes, supports the foot. And the third reason that they should be pulling is because the muscles at the front don't get a lot of opportunity to work when the stronger muscles at the back are constantly pointing down. So what you are doing is you are controlling the heel, keeping it as close to midline as you can. You are supporting the foot while the child pulls. And as they pull, this muscle relaxes, and then you can help them take the foot further and further up. You can make it into games. You can ask them, and once they're up as far as they can go, then they have to hold it. That is important. They hold it for a count of 5. Then they learn to hold it for a count of 10. And we don't do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because it's boring. So we do 1 elephant, 2 elephants, 1 banana, 1 pizza, 1 Ferrari, 1 football team, whatever you want to do. And that's how you do active stretches. And then you don't get the screaming and the fighting. One other thing you should know, you do them slowly and you keep them in a good position. Now, if you do them fast against the child fighting because they're constantly screaming and it's all become a battle and a chore, there are things called stretch receptors in your tendons. This is the basis of the reflex. When you hit your knee, you know, when the doctors hit your knee to get your reflex reaction, that is the stretch reflex. Basically, it is to protect the muscle and the joint. So when they hit your patella tendon and your leg does that, it probably doesn't in SMA because you've got no muscle to do that, but that's the idea of it. You know, from hitting your own tendons, the idea is they do that. That is your stretch reflex. So if you do it fast and overstretch, the reaction is to do the opposite thing, to shorten the tendon. And it's a protective mechanism. Otherwise, we'd have many more sprains and injuries in our joints than we do. And that is a protective mechanism. So if you go too fast, you will set up a stretch reflex and you will get the opposite movement. So these things have to be done slowly. This is not a race, up, down, up, down, up, down, as fast as you can, fighting the child, because it all goes wrong. And this is where we get the screaming, the shouting, the pain, and the don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
and that was not about SMA babies and infants, but that's besides the point. Yes.
I mean, I was just going to say, from my experience, I had a physio as a kid who would come and go straight for my ankles, and I knew what was coming, and I'd tense up, and I'd end up with very tender ankles for the next week. And it's not
impossible. I cannot stress enough. And as I say, we've been shouting this. I've been doing this for 30 years. We do not stress SMA ankles. And, you know, if we teach our students, if we teach on our courses one thing, it is active assisted all the time. Children with SMA can move. They are not paralyzed. They are just weak. And this is the thing with SMA1. Those muscles are not paralyzed unless you are a 1A and you are really doing nothing. The type 1B, type 1C are not paralyzed. You just have to learn how to assist them in moving. And this is what it's all about. And this is where the TheraBand comes in. You don't have to have TheraBand. Good old-fashioned scrunchie will work. Stick it around an ankle or a wrist swing. There's amazing amounts of things you can do. I don't think we got anywhere near as far as we need to, because we needed to look at seating and all sorts of other things for infants. It looks like in a fortnight's time we will be continuing on this theme.
Do a part 2.
It looks as though they will, unless people want something different in 2 weeks. It looks like we have a part 2.
Yeah, I think part 2 is a good plan, because this is
okay.
popular.
No problem, Marnie. I will see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.